They said no one could last 10 seconds against Krath, the undefeated monster of Obsidian Station. Then a human walked in, and 31 seconds later, the galaxy learned what fear actually looks like. Krath stood at the observation deck of Mercenary Station Obsidian. He was all 7 feet of scaled muscle and battle-scarred pride, a living monument to Voran supremacy. For 3 solid years, he was undefeated in the combat rings. 62 challengers, 40 different species, and not one had managed to keep him down for more than 8 seconds. His dorsal spikes weren't just for show. They held 19 kill notches carved deep. This was a warrior forged in actual fire, a beast who had snapped a Corian battle champion's spine with his bare hands. And now, he was watching this human shuttle dock. He felt what could only be described as profound disappointment. Humans. He'd heard of them, of course. Everyone had. The new species on the block, barely 200 years in space, acting like they owned every station they set foot on. He sneered. They were soft, squishy. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom, nothing that screamed an apex predator. Their bone density was laughable. They needed environment suits for temperatures that most species found mildly comfortable. In short, they were disappointments wrapped in synthetic fiber uniforms. A nervous chirp broke his focus. Commander Vorgash expects you at the docking bay for the greeting ceremony. It was Nishal, the station's Trill communications officer, her antennae twitching. She had learned to be nervous around Krath. Most people had. Why? Krath rumbled, not bothering to turn around. Are humans going to collapse from station gravity? Do they need someone to carry their luggage? Commander's orders, she squeaked, and wisely scurried away. Krath moved, his massive form eclipsing the viewport. The docking bay smelled of recycled air and hydraulic fluid. Commander Vorgash was already there, all 4 of his arms clasped behind his back in that ridiculous diplomatic pose. The old Kiksari had gone soft, collecting docking fees and pretending to be important. Ah, Krath. Perfect timing, Vorgash said, his translator implant giving his words that annoying formal edge. Our human guests will be emerging shortly. I trust you will be on your best behavior. Krath's lip curled. I am always on my best behavior. And it was true. If your definition of best behavior included casual violence and calculated intimidation. The airlock hissed and the humans emerged. 5 of them, all wearing matching gray uniforms with enough pockets to hide a small armory. They were absurdly similar in height, all hovering around 6 feet, and Krath, a 7-foot wall of scaled muscle, felt a new wave of disappointment. The contrast was laughable. He noted one male had hair on his face unhygienic and ridiculous. The females had their hair pulled back in severe styles. But it was the woman in front who caught his attention. Not because she was impressive. She was perhaps 5'9", unremarkable in her human proportions, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read Taurus. As Vorgash droned on with his 4-armed welcome, she stepped forward and extended one hand, the handshake, a bizarre pump-like ritual. Krath sighed and took her hand, the way one might handle a fragile piece of cargo. And then, contact. Her grip was firm, not strong, but solid. Her palm had calluses. He looked up from her hand to her face. Her eyes met his directly, without the usual flicker of fear most species showed. They were an unusual shade of brown, almost amber, and in them, Krath saw no fear, no intimidation. He saw focus, like a predator, calculating angles. Krath, she said, her voice level. I've heard about your reputation in the combat rings. Impressive record. Undefeated, Krath corrected, his voice a low rumble. 62 matches, she repeated. Was that amusement in her voice? That must keep you busy. Not busy enough, Krath said, releasing her hand. Most challengers these days lack spirit. They surrender too quickly. It's become boring. One of the other humans, the male with the face hair, made a sound like a suppressed laugh, and in that moment, Krath's arrogance connected with his mouth. "Perhaps," he said, the words sliding out, "you would like to try your luck, Captain Torres?" The docking bay went dead silent. Vorgash's 4 hands froze. "A friendly sparring match," Krath continued, already savoring his 63rd victory. "I promise to be gentle. Humans are fragile, after all." Rebecca Torres tilted her head. She didn't answer immediately. For 3 full seconds, she just looked at him. Krath saw her team stiffen. One of the other females clearly mouthed the word, "Don't." Krath mistook the silence for fear. But it wasn't fear. It was a calculation. Her amber eyes were scanning his neck, his center mass, his knees. Then, she smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed an unexpected gift. "All right," she said, her voice clear and sharp. "I accept your challenge, Krath." Later, in his quarters, Krath was already planning his moves. A quick takedown, nothing flashy. Just enough to make the point. His private comm chimed. It was Nishal, her voice trembling. "Krath, I've been monitoring the human networks. Their military training is extensive. Perhaps you should research before tomorrow." "Research?" Krath laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Research what? How to avoid breaking her too badly? Don't worry, little Nishal. I'll make it quick." The comm chimed again. This time, it was Vorgash. "Krath, I just pulled her official file. It lists her specialty as CQC instructor. Are you sure you want to?" Krath cut the connection. CQC instructor? Teaching soft humans how to pretend to fight. This would be even more amusing than he thought. He dismissed the warning. It was the last mistake he'd ever make as an undefeated champion. The news spread through Obsidian Station like a reactor leak. Krath versus the human. By morning, every sentient being with a pulse and a credit account knew about the match. The odds, which had started at 5-0 to 1, shifted overnight as rumor of the human's confidence spread. They settled at a laughable 7-5 to 1. Someone was going to make a fortune, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be the poor souls betting on the soft skin. Krath had specifically chosen Arena 3. It was the smallest of the station's combat rings, a merciful gesture, he told himself. No point in giving her a large space to run away in. By 1900 hours, the arena was packed, shoulder to shoulder, a writhing mass of species. The air was thick. It stank of the metallic tang of the energy barriers, the sharp, clean scent of ozone, and the coppery smell of old, dried blood that the rubberized composite floor never quite released. A chaotic symphony of 17 different languages rose from the crowd, all chattering, roaring, and hissing, all united by a singular primal bloodlust. They wanted a show. They were about to get massacred. Commander Vorgash stood at the center, his 4 arms raised for attention. "Attention, please. This is a voluntary sparring exhibition. Before we begin, we must establish rules and limitations." "No limitations," Krath roared from his corner, the sound cutting through the den like a shockwave. He stretched, his dorsal spikes flexing impressively. "The human agreed to standard terms. Standard means unrestricted. First to submit, or first to sleep. Those are the only rules needed." Vorgash winced, all 4 of his eyes blinking in rapid succession. He turned to the opposite corner. "Captain Torres, do you consent to unrestricted combat? No rules regarding strikes, holds, or techniques?" Rebecca stepped forward. She wore a simple black outfit, flexible fabric that covered her from neck to feet. No armor, no protective gear. Just cloth and that unsettling confidence. "I consent," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent arena. "Unrestricted is fine. Who am I to limit his artistic expression?" The crowd laughed. Krath did not. They met at the center. The size difference was obscene. He was a 7-foot tower of scales and scarred muscle. She was just a woman. He had 8 inches of height and at least 100 pounds of pure, dense muscle on her. She moved into a ready position, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at her sides, weight balanced. Krath almost smiled. He recognized the stance. A basic, fundamental, adequate form for someone who had taken a self-defense class once. Pathetic. "Any last words?" Krath asked, feeling genuinely generous. Rebecca looked up at him, those amber eyes completely calm, completely focused. "Yes, actually," she said. "Just one question. After you take your first shot and I'm still standing, after I hit you back, and you wake up confused, try to remember what year it is, okay? I hear head trauma affects memory." The arena went dead silent. Krath blinked, processing the words. Then he laughed. He laughed so hard his dorsal spikes rattled. "Oh, human, that is excellent." He boomed, wiping an imagined tear from his eye. "Truly, I appreciate confidence, even when it's delusional. This will be fun." Vorgash raised all four arms, his face a mask of concern. "Combatants ready." Krath nodded, still grinning. Rebecca just smiled. "Begin," Vorgash shouted, leaping clear of the ring with surprising speed. Krath decided to end this quickly. Overwhelming force, immediate dominance, standard doctrine. He lunged, faster than most beings his size had any right to move, and threw a devastating right cross aimed at her center mass. This was the blow that had crumpled armored opponents, the one that carried 3 years of undefeated momentum. It connected perfectly. But in the final microsecond, something impossible happened. She didn't dodge. She didn't block. She moved with it, twisting her torso, exhaling sharply, and intentionally taking the full force of the blow on her side. A wet, brutal thud echoed through the arena, followed immediately by the sharp, dry crack of ribs giving way. Rebecca Torres flew backward 3 feet, her boots scraping the floor, arms pinwheeling for balance. Krath straightened, already preparing his victory speech. He'd hit her hard enough to kill most species. Then, Rebecca stopped sliding. She stood there, bent forward, one hand pressed hard against her ribs. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse. She did not collapse. Slowly, agonizingly, she straightened up. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin white line. Then she smiled. It was a terrifying, feral grimace that showed teeth and blood. A thin line of red trailed down her chin from a split lip. "Good hit," she said, her voice strained but steady. "I definitely felt that one. Pretty sure that's a cracked rib. Maybe 2. Krath just stared. You should be unconscious." "Should I?" she asked, starting to circle, her gait now fluid and purposeful. "See, here's the thing you didn't research, Krath. You just activated my combat drugs. My species. We're not strong. We're stubborn. My turn." Krath roared, enraged by this biological trickery, and charged again. He threw his fight-ending combination. Left jab, right cross, left hook. And Rebecca moved. Not away, not backward. She moved into his attack, inside his reach. Before Krath could even process this tactical insanity, her elbow connected with his lower ribs, hitting something soft and vital. Pain, actual pain, exploded across his torso. Before he could react, she was behind him. Something hard struck the back of his knee. His leg buckled. Then, her forearm was across his throat, applying pressure, cutting off blood flow to his brain with practiced, professional lethality. A lateral vascular neck restraint, a blood choke. He grabbed her arm, tried to throw her off. She weighed nothing. He had every advantage. He used his last resort, a move of pure, desperate power. He threw himself backward, slamming her entire body into the arena floor with his full 300-pound weight. It should have broken her grip. It should have crushed her spine. He heard her grunt, a sharp, agonizing sound of air being driven from her lungs. But she held on. In fact, as he slammed her, she used his momentum. She hooked her legs around his waist, drove her shoulder into the back of his head, and tightened the choke. His escape attempt had only doomed him faster. 5 seconds, she hissed, her voice tight with pain but coherent. Should have done your research. Panic. A real cold panic hit Krath for the first time in 3 years. His vision narrowed, dark edges crept in. His massive hands clawed uselessly at her arm. This was impossible. Humans were weak. 62 victories. Who, what year? Good night, champion, she whispered. The world went dark. Rebecca held the choke for exactly 2 seconds after he went limp. Standard procedure, then released him. His massive body slumped to the mat like a sack of wet concrete. She stood up slowly, one hand clutching her ribs. Everything hurts. But she was standing, and Krath was not. The arena exploded into a sound she couldn't process. She limped, looking up at Vorgash, who was staring, all 4 eyes wide. I think, she panted, I think he needs medical attention. Krath woke to blinding white light and the distinct chemical smell of medical disinfectant. His head felt like someone had filled it with wet sand. His throat ached. His pride was gone. What happened? He croaked, his voice rough and damaged. Explosive decompression? No, a familiar voice replied. Commander Vorgash, you had a sparring match. Right, Krath said, the fog slowly clearing. The human, Rebecca Torres. I was about to end it quickly. And then. The memory was there, but scrambled. It didn't make sense. What year is it? There was a long, heavy pause. Krath thought he heard Vorgash suppress a laugh. It is still the same year, Krath. You were unconscious for approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes? Krath tried to sit up, but a bolt of pain shot through his neck and shoulders. Impossible! I never lose consciousness! My record is unblemished! 62-0! 62-1. A small voice corrected from the corner. Nishal. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? You lost, Vorgash said, his diplomatic tone replaced with blunt honesty. Captain Torres rendered you unconscious in 31 seconds, and that was after you cracked 2 of her ribs with your opening strike. As Krath tried to process this, the door to the medbay hissed open. Rebecca Torres stood there, a medical wrap visible under her loose station shirt. She looked tired, pained, and somehow satisfied. That was a good opening strike, she said quietly. But not good enough, Krath said, the words tasting like ash. Oh, it was good enough, she corrected, moving stiffly to a chair. You cracked 2 of my ribs, just like I hoped you would. Krath stared. Hoped? You fought with broken ribs? Cracked, she corrected again. And, yes, that was the plan. You called us fragile. You're right, we are. But fragile does not mean weak. She tapped the wrap on her torso. It means we break more easily. But our bodies, they have contingencies. When we experience severe trauma, our systems dump a chemical cocktail into our blood. Adrenaline, heart rate increases, pain receptors get suppressed, reaction time improves. I needed that first hit, Krath. I needed the pain to trigger the response. You were so focused on your overwhelming force, you never realized your greatest weapon could be turned against you. You gave me exactly what I needed to win. Krath lay back, staring at the sterile white ceiling. His entire worldview, built on 3 years of brutal physical certainty, had been dismantled in 31 seconds. He had been beaten by a fragile creature who used her own brokenness as a weapon. His strength was a liability. His confidence had been nothing but pure arrogance. He looked at her, this small, soft human who had outthought and outfought him. Teach me, Krath said, the words rough and unfamiliar in his throat. Rebecca studied him for a long, silent moment. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate humility. She finally nodded, a small, weary smile touching her lips. All right, she said. First lesson, Strength is an advantage, not a solution. Meet me in Arena 3 tomorrow. 2 months later, Krath stood at that same docking bay, but he was not the same warrior. A new ship had arrived, this one carrying a crew of Brontali warriors, massive beings from a high-gravity world, all muscle and poorly concealed aggression. Their leader, a specimen named Torgan, who made Krath look small, swaggered off the ship and immediately began making pronouncements about his combat prowess. He spotted Krath and stomped over. "You," Torgan boomed. "I hear you are the station's champion. I challenge you." Krath didn't flex. He didn't roar. He simply held up one hand, a gesture of calm patience. "Before you issue any challenges," Krath said, his voice level, "let me tell you a story about assumptions. It's a short story, 31 seconds to be precise." "Are you trying to intimidate me with a story?" Torgan laughed. "No," Krath said. "I am trying to save you from embarrassment." He held out his personal datapad. On the screen, the infamous match was queued up. I was undefeated, 62 victories. I outweighed her by 100 pounds. I was certain of victory. Torgan's eyes narrowed as he watched the recording. The human taking the devastating first blow, the bloodied smile, the lightning-fast choke, the champion's collapse. "That recording," Krath said flatly, "has been viewed over 2 million times across 17 networks. I have become a cautionary tale, a meme, I believe humans call it. My legacy is now a warning about arrogance. So, I ask you, warrior to warrior, do you want to be the sequel?" Torgan stared at the video, then at the massive, humbled Vorin in front of him. His swagger was gone. I think I'll try the cantina on level 7, he muttered, and quickly moved on. Krath turned as Rebecca appeared from behind a cargo container, a laugh playing on her lips. "Saving him from his own arrogance?" she asked. "Self-preservation," Krath corrected, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the training arena. "I cannot allow my record to be surpassed, even in failure. I must remain the most thoroughly defeated warrior on this station." "Ready for today's lesson, champion?" she asked, smiling. Krath sighed, the sound no longer a growl, but one of weary acceptance. "Same time tomorrow. I have years of arrogance to unlearn. Might as well start early." Krath's undefeated record was gone forever. His education, however, had just begun. And somewhere in the station's data networks, the view counter on his most embarrassing moment ticked upward once more, immortalizing the day he learned that confidence without knowledge was just arrogance, waiting for a 31-second correction. What do you think was the most important part of Krath's 31-second lesson? Was it Rebecca's adrenaline-fueled plan, the flawless technique, or the humility that Krath finally learned? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.